2026 has started off with a bang, and the game of geopolitical chess continues. The big news at the moment is the USA's bombing of Venezuela and capture of Nicolas Maduro. And while that is huge, it's not the main event. It's part of the shaping of the battlefield to come, strategic positioning ahead of the defining rivalry of this century, the United States and China. Donald Trump has been moving pieces around the board, strategically making decisions that will dismantle China's allies, hinder their access to resources and shipping lanes, and make sure that the US allies are ready to step up when called upon. Across multiple regions, we're seeing pressure applied, alliances tested, and long-standing assumptions quietly rewritten. Venezuela, Iran, Ukraine, Russia, and Australia has a part to play. Today, I want to take a look at the game of geopolitical chess that the USA is playing, explain what I think is happening, and try to understand Australia's role as a key player in the Indo-Pacific. I'm Mel Pikos, and today, we're talking tactics. The Unholy Alliance. While China is the greatest threat to the USA, it makes up 1/3 of what I've previously called the Unholy Alliance: China, Russia, and Iran. While the three countries don't share any official, legal NATO-style alliance, they do have a loose, pragmatic alignment driven by a shared opposition to US dominance, mutual frustrations with sanctions and Western pressure, and overlapping interests in energy, arms, and regional influence. Between them, they have joint military drills and exercises, strategic partnerships in areas such as oil and gas, infrastructure, telecommunications, and transport corridors linked to China's Belt and Road Initiative. This loose agreement complicates US strategies by forcing multi-theatre attention. It also gives these countries options to get relief from sanctions and enables tech and weapons transfers that may have been more difficult otherwise. So it is in the best interests of the US to break down the Unholy Alliance as much as possible. And they've already started doing that. Russia. Let's start with Russia. Now, don't get me wrong, Russia is dangerous, but they are a regional power with a shrinking industrial base. China is a systemic rival with a global reach. China is more of a threat, so the US needed to be able to focus its attention there rather than in Europe. In 2025, the US reviewed and paused certain support elements for Ukraine's defense against Russia. While they still lead in support, this sparked a debate about burden sharing and whether the rest of Europe was doing enough. Some saw this as fatigue or weakness, but what actually happened was prioritization. The US effectively told Europe, "This is your continent, you take the lead." The US isn't going to fight multiple major strategic competitors at the same time. And so Europe did actually step up. Aid from the United Kingdom and the Nordics increased sharply in March and April 2025, following the US's withdrawal. And the US shifted its attention to the other two members of the Unholy Alliance: Iran. Over the past 5 years, US-Iran relations have stayed locked in confrontation. The US withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018. Efforts under the Biden administration to revive the agreement stalled, and Iran continued expanding its nuclear program. Instead of direct conflict, the rivalry has played out through proxies across the Middle East, with Iranian-backed groups clashing with US forces and disrupting shipping. There have been conflicts with Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen attacking shipping lanes in the Red Sea, and of course, conflicts with Hamas. Then in 2025, Iran was hammered by a coordinated US-Israeli bombing campaign. Not a carpet bombing, but a series of precision strikes. They hit nuclear sites, missile facilities, drone infrastructure, command nodes. Iran didn't collapse from this, but it cracked. The country is experiencing internal unrest, factional pressure, and an uprising that's simmering and has escalated into nationwide protests ongoing today. Donald Trump has actually warned Iran that the US may take action against the country if Iranian protesters are killed during these uprisings. He hasn't elaborated on what those actions might be, but he has been briefed on the options for military strikes in the country. There are also reports that Iran's supreme leader, Al Khamenei, is preparing to flee to Russia in the wake of the uprisings and potential US attacks. And no doubt the capture of Nicolas Maduro has sent shivers down his spine. Iran has also promised to retaliate if the US does strike them. As of this video's filming, there hasn't been a US attack on Iran, but who knows? By the time it's released, and you're watching, it may have already happened. When Iran is fighting internally, it makes it hard to be a strong member of the Unholy Alliance. If the US takes out Iran's ability to project power, they weaken Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, and they reduce disruptions to key shipping lanes, and they help ease pressure on Israel. And more importantly, they reduce China's ability to rely on Iran as a strategic distraction. China. So with Europe taking the lead against Russia and Iran fighting itself, the US can turn its attention to China. Already, the US has military bases along the island defense chain. There are bases in Okinawa, Japan, in Guam, and they now have access to 9 bases in the Philippines under defense cooperation agreements. Then there are the tariffs and the trade wars that Trump has been waging with China. But there are also other strategic plays being made that are also aimed at subduing China, even though it may not seem like it on the surface. And the first of these is the Venezuelan strikes. Venezuela. As stated publicly, the US strikes on Venezuela were about drugs. Trump says that Nicolas Maduro, the president/dictator of the country, was the head of a narco-terrorist unit that smuggled cocaine and fentanyl into the US, and that these strikes were self-defense. They have also made mention a lot about the oil in Venezuela and how it was stolen from the US, and so the US is taking it back. But let's take a closer look. Venezuela has the world's largest known oil reserves, over 300 billion barrels, and a large bulk of their oil exports were to China. That's likely going to stop now. China is heavily dependent on oil imports. Now, Venezuelan oil only makes up around about 4 to 5% of China's total imports, but that's not nothing. China's other main sources of oil imports are Iran and Russia. Iran is currently experiencing protests and uprisings, and Russia is struggling in a war with Ukraine. If those sources of oil dry up, China is looking to be in a tough spot. Without oil, without energy, there are certain things China can't do. They can't, for instance, launch a military campaign to take Taiwan or sustain a naval blockade around the island. Trump claiming the oil might look like he wants to become a global Daniel Plainview and drink Venezuela's milkshake.
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up.
But in a bigger picture, it feels like a strategic move to cut off China from key resources and reduce their ability to mount a military campaign. And secondly, the Venezuelan military is mostly armed with Chinese-made weapons and platforms. Their National Guard uses VN-4 armoured personnel carriers, and the Air Force flies K-8 Karakoram light attack jets. Both of these were built by Chinese defense companies. Plus, Venezuela operated the JY-27 anti-stealth radar system built by China, but the USA effectively waltzed in, captured the leader in the country, and is now effectively running the place. These Chinese-built weapons were ineffective against the superior might of the USA's gear, which is most likely giving China pause when thinking about starting anything in the Indo-Pacific. The Panama Canal. Now we get to one of the most consequential moves of 2025 and one of the least discussed. Quietly and largely outside the headlines, China had positioned itself with effective control over key entry and exit ports connected to the Panama Canal. That matters because the canal is not just infrastructure, it is a strategic choke point for global trade, energy flows, and naval mobility between the Atlantic and Pacific. Donald Trump publicly demanded that those port holdings be divested. What followed was not a standoff, but a transaction. He did a deal. The assets were acquired by BlackRock alongside other US-aligned investment firms, and by August, majority control had shifted back into American hands. This was not about economics. In wartime, trade routes become weapons. Control over the Panama Canal means leverage over global shipping, dominance over logistics flows, and the ability to deny or delay adversary movements when it matters most. And then something else happened. Within weeks of that control changing hands, US enforcement activity surged in the region, including the interception and destruction of Venezuelan narcotics vessels operating along those routes. That timing was not accidental. It was a signal. Control had been reasserted. It was being enforced. Australia. Now let's talk about where Australia fits into all of this strategic positioning. Australia isn't on the sidelines. In fact, we sit right at one of the sharpest edges of the emerging competition between the United States and China, the tip of the spear. We're a long-standing US ally in the Indo-Pacific, and that alliance is only getting deeper. The AUKUS security partnership is moving full steam ahead, with Australia committed to acquiring nuclear-powered submarines and strengthening its defence industrial base alongside Washington and London. In October 2025, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and President Donald Trump signed a historic critical minerals framework in Washington. This deal is worth billions of dollars in joint investment designed to secure supply chains for rare earths and other strategic minerals that are crucial for defence systems, advanced technologies, and energy security, and to reduce dependence on China's dominance in those markets. That's significant because critical minerals are the lifeblood of modern military and industrial technologies. Everything from guided missiles and radar systems to electric vehicles and energy storage. Australia has huge reserves, and this cooperation with the United States links us directly into the supply chains that the world's most advanced militaries will rely on in the coming decades. And we're not just a trading partner, we're increasingly a logistics hub and forward operating platform for allied power projection. In 2025, Defence Posture Cooperation was expanded, which includes infrastructure upgrades at Darwin and Tyndall to support rotations of US bombers, fighters and surveillance aircraft, and increased marine deployments. HMAS Sterling is also being upgraded to host a rotating force of US submarines, as well as to become the home of our own nuclear-powered submarines. If future conflict with China ever turned kinetic, Australia would not be on the margins. We would be a staging ground, a sustainment node, a deterrence platform directly connected to US force posture and operations in the region. This isn't just cooperation for convenience. It's integration into a broader alliance strategy that couples AUKUS submarines, critical minerals, and industrial cooperation and forward defence infrastructure to prepare for the strategic pressures of the decade ahead. And while this integration brings security guarantees, it also means Australia's strategic choices. How we position bases, how we invest in defence industry, and how we align diplomatically will increasingly shape not just our future, but the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. What to expect in 2026. So what should we expect in 2026? More pressure, more positioning, and fewer ambiguities. Trump's continued remarks about Greenland are a signal, not a joke. Strategic geography is back on the table, and control of territory, resources, ports, and sea lanes is once again being discussed openly by major powers. Expect the US to keep tightening the screws on China's access to energy, trade routes, and allies, while accelerating military integration with partners like Australia, Japan, and the Philippines. We are likely to see expanded US force posture in the Indo-Pacific, sharper economic coercion through tariffs and investment controls, and further moves to lock down critical minerals and logistics hubs. For Australia, 2026 is the year that this all becomes impossible to ignore. New capabilities arrive, alliance expectations harden, and Canberra is forced to operate less like a distant ally and more like a frontline state in a long-term strategic contest that is already well underway. It will be interesting to see what the upcoming National Defence Strategy document says, and if you're interested in hearing more about that, hit that subscribe button because I'll be covering it. But that's it for today. I'm Pikos. Welcome to 2026 because we have been talking tactics.